The message arrived on a cold Tuesday morning at Earth's United Defense Command headquarters in Geneva. Admiral Gregory Kane stood before the holographic projection and watched as the Galactic Council's official seal rotated slowly in the air. The translation matrix hummed as it decoded the message from 17 different alien languages into standard English. He had been expecting something, but not this. The Council rarely contacted Earth directly, and when they did, it was usually to request payment of membership dues or to inform humanity about decisions already made without their input. Lieutenant Sophie Martin stepped forward with her tablet glowing in the dim light of the command center. She was young but sharp and had been tracking Council communications for 3 years now. Her face showed concern as she read the decoded message again to make sure she understood it correctly. This was not a routine communication. This was something that had not happened in living memory. Admiral Kane rubbed his tired eyes and read the message one more time. The Galactic Council was summoning Earth to a mandatory attendance hearing. Every single Council species had to send their primary representative. No exceptions, no delays. The message made it clear that this was not optional. This was a command that carried the full weight of galactic law behind it. Sophie spoke quietly as other officers gathered around the projection. They all wanted to know what was happening. Mandatory attendance hearings were the stuff of history books. The last one had occurred 400 years ago, when the Kelvin species had been accused of violating territorial boundaries. That hearing had resulted in a war that lasted 30 years and reshaped the political landscape of 2 entire sectors. Kane felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. He knew why they were being summoned. 3 weeks ago, a human colony ship called the New Dawn had been attacked near the Terminus sector. The ship had been carrying 15,000 colonists to a frontier world called New Haven. Most of them had been families, parents and children seeking new opportunities away from the crowded inner systems. They had been merchants and farmers and teachers and engineers. They had been civilians with no weapons and no military escort. The Vrex raiders had shown no mercy. They had disabled the New Dawn's engines first to prevent escape. Then they had boarded the ship deck by deck and killed everyone they found. The few survivors who had managed to hide in cargo containers told stories of screams echoing through corridors and of families being dragged from their quarters. By the time Earth Defense Forces arrived, the raiders were gone and the New Dawn was a floating graveyard. The Galactic Council's response had been predictable. They sent a formal letter of condolence written in the carefully neutral language that diplomats used when they wanted to express sympathy without actually committing to anything. The letter promised to investigate the matter thoroughly and to bring the perpetrators to justice through proper legal channels. It was the same response Earth had received 19 times before, when human ships had been attacked in the outer territories. Kane walked to the window and looked out at the city below. Geneva was peaceful in the early morning light. People were going about their lives unaware that their government was about to make a decision that could change everything. He had spent 40 years in Earth's defense forces. He had seen humanity grow from a single planet species to a civilization spread across 30 star systems. He had watched as Earth joined the Galactic Council and learned to navigate the complex web of interstellar politics. But he had also watched as humans were treated like children at the adult table. Earth paid its dues and followed the rules and kept quiet during debates about policies that affected billions of lives across the galaxy. The older species viewed humanity as newcomers who needed to learn their place. 200 years of membership had not changed that perception. Humans were tolerated but not respected. They were allowed to speak but rarely listened to. Sophie cleared her throat to get his attention. Other officers were waiting for orders. They needed to know how to respond to the Council's summons. Standard protocol would be to accept immediately and send the usual diplomatic delegation. Ambassador. Richard Cole would go and smile politely and thank the Council for their attention, and humanity would receive another promise of investigation that would lead nowhere. Kane turned back to face his staff. He looked at each of them in turn. These were good people who had dedicated their lives to protecting Earth and its colonies. They deserved better than empty promises. The families on New Haven deserved better. The 15,000 people who had died on the New Dawn deserved better. He made a decision that he knew would have consequences far beyond this room. They would accept the Council's invitation, but they would not play by the expected rules. Not this time. Humanity had been patient for 200 years. They had followed every protocol and respected every tradition, and deferred to species that had been traveling the stars for millennia. And where had it gotten them? Their people were dying, and the council was offering another investigation. Kane ordered Sophie to send an acceptance message to the council. Earth would attend the hearing. Then he told her to do something else. He wanted her to contact Ambassador Cole immediately and arrange a secure communication channel. He also wanted Colonel Lisa Hayes brought in from the Mars Defense Station. She commanded Earth's elite orbital guard, and her perspective would be needed for what came next. Finally, he wanted Dr. Nathan Pierce pulled from his research sabbatical. Pierce was humanity's leading expert on alien cultures, and he understood how the council species thought better than anyone. Sophie's eyes widened as she realized what the Admiral was planning. This was not going to be a routine diplomatic mission. Kane was assembling a team for something bigger. Something that would either force the council to take humanity seriously, or cause a crisis that would shake the foundations of galactic politics. The other officers began moving to carry out their orders. Within minutes, the command center was buzzing with activity. Secure channels were being opened. Priority messages were being sent across the solar system. Ships were being quietly moved into position. No one outside this room knew what was being planned, but everyone inside understood that something fundamental was about to change. Kane returned to the window and watched the sun rise over the mountains. In 3 weeks, Earth's delegation would arrive at Proxima Axis for the council hearing. The older species expected humanity to accept whatever decision they made. They expected gratitude and compliance. They expected humans to know their place in the galactic order. They were going to be very surprised. The USS Endeavour departed from Luna, stationed 3 days later under a sky full of stars that humanity had only begun to explore. The ship was Earth's most advanced diplomatic vessel and carried the hopes of 30 billion humans spread across multiple star systems. Inside the main cabin, Ambassador Richard Cole sat reviewing documents that represented 2 centuries of galactic law and political maneuvering. He had been a diplomat for 30 years and had learned to read between the lines of every treaty and accord that governed relations between species. Richard was a tall man with gray hair and calm eyes that missed very little. He had negotiated trade agreements with the Kelvin and mediated disputes between human colonies and their alien neighbors. He understood how the game was played. Humanity was expected to be grateful for its seat at the council table. Young species were supposed to defer to older civilizations and accept that age meant wisdom, and youth meant inferiority. For 30 years he had played that role perfectly and smiled while doing it, but something had changed inside him 3 weeks ago when news of the New Dawn massacre reached Earth. He had known some of the families on that ship. The Henderson family had been neighbors when he lived in Chicago before his diplomatic career began. Their daughter Amy had babysat his children. She had been 23 years old with dreams of starting a farm on New Haven. Now, she was gone along with her parents and younger brother and 15,000 other people who had committed no crime except being human and vulnerable. Colonel Lisa Hayes joined him at the observation window as Earth grew smaller behind them. She was a career military officer who commanded the orbital guard with efficiency and discipline. Her uniform was crisp and her posture spoke of someone who had spent years in combat situations. She had fought pirates in the asteroid belt and defended mining colonies from corporate raiders. She knew violence in ways that diplomats never would. Lisa looked at Richard with barely concealed frustration. She had attended too many memorial services in recent years. She had written too many letters to families explaining how their loved ones had died in attacks that the council considered minor incidents not worth immediate action. The military response options were always the same. File a report. Wait for council authorization. Follow proper channels while more humans died. Richard turned from the window to face her directly. His expression held something she had not seen before. There was still the diplomatic calm that came from years of careful negotiation, but underneath it was steel. He was done playing by rules that protected everyone except his own people. He was done smiling while the council offered sympathy instead of action. Dr. Nathan Pierce approached them carrying a data pad filled with information he had been compiling for weeks. Nathan was a xenobiologist and cultural specialist who had spent his entire adult life studying alien civilizations. He understood their psychology and their social structures and their deeply held beliefs. He knew which species valued honor, and which valued profit, and which responded only to displays of strength. Nathan had worked with the Council Secretariat for 15 years as a cultural liaison. He had advised human diplomats on how to avoid offending alien sensibilities and how to navigate the complex protocols that governed Council interactions. But he had also been quietly documenting every time those protocols were bent or broken to benefit powerful species, while being rigidly enforced against weaker ones. His research showed patterns that most diplomats either missed or chose to ignore. The three of them moved to a secure conference room deep inside the Endeavor. The walls were lined with dampening fields that prevented any signal from entering or leaving. What they discussed here would remain private until they chose to reveal it. Richard activated a holographic display that showed the council chamber at Proxima Axis. The massive amphitheater could hold thousands of delegates and observers. Humanity's platform was positioned in the outer ring far from the center, where the most powerful species held their places. Nathan began his presentation with psychological profiles of key council members. The Gentari valued personal honor and martial prowess above all else. Their warriors would respect strength but despised weakness or deception. The Kelvin operated on strict hierarchical systems where every individual knew their exact place in society. They expected others to follow similar structures and became uncomfortable when hierarchies were unclear or challenged. The Mordesh were ancient beings who thought in terms of centuries rather than years. They valued patience and philosophical contemplation and considered quick action to be primitive and rash. Each species had its own communication style and its own unwritten rules about proper behavior. Nathan explained how human delegates had been carefully trained to adapt to these expectations. They spoke softly to avoid seeming aggressive. They deferred to elder species to show respect. They waited their turn to speak and kept their statements brief to avoid wasting council time. These behaviors had become so ingrained that most human diplomats did them automatically, without questioning whether they were actually beneficial. Richard listened carefully and then asked a question that changed the entire dynamic of their mission. What would happen if they stopped adapting? What would happen if humanity simply spoke their truth without filtering it through alien cultural expectations? Nathan considered this for a long moment. The answer was complex because it depended on how other species interpreted the change. Some might see it as refreshing honesty. Others might view it as dangerous unpredictability. Lisa added her own perspective from years of military experience. Enemies respected strength and exploited weakness. The Vrex raiders attacked human ships because they calculated that the Council would not intervene forcefully enough to make the raids unprofitable. If humanity wanted different results, they needed to change the calculations. They needed to make it clear that attacking humans carried consequences that outweighed any potential benefits. Over the next 2 weeks, as the Endeavor traveled through hyperspace lanes toward Proxima Axis, the three of them worked on something that had never been attempted before. They were creating a statement that would violate nearly every diplomatic protocol that governed council proceedings. Richard would not be asking for help. He would not be expressing gratitude for council attention. He would not be making polite suggestions that could be easily ignored. Instead, he would be delivering an ultimatum backed by legal arguments drawn from the council's own charter. Nathan had found precedents buried in 400 years of council history. There were clauses and articles that almost no one referenced anymore, because they dealt with situations that were supposed to be impossible under modern galactic governance. But the words were still there in the founding documents, and they gave member species rights that the council had conveniently forgotten. Richard practiced his statement dozens of times while Lisa coordinated with Earth's military command. Ships were being quietly repositioned. Defense grids were being activated. Colony militias were being placed on alert. None of this was secret exactly, but it was not being advertised either. The movements looked like routine training exercises and patrol rotations. Only a few people knew that Earth's entire military apparatus was being prepared for action. They also sent encrypted messages to every human colony and outpost. The messages were brief and carefully worded. They told people to be ready. They told ship captains to check their weapons systems. They told governors to review emergency protocols. Most importantly, they told everyone that humanity was done waiting for permission to defend itself. Sophie Martin maintained constant communication with the Endeavor from Earth. She provided updates on council activities and tracked which species were discussing the upcoming hearing. The chatter suggested that most delegates expected a routine session. The humans would present their case about the New Dawn massacre. The council would express sympathy and promise another investigation. Then everyone would go home and nothing would change. Richard sat alone in his quarters the night before they reached Proxima Axis. He thought about Amy Henderson and her dreams of farming on a new world. He thought about the other 15,000 people whose lives had been stolen. He thought about every human who had died while the council debated proper procedures. Tomorrow he would walk into that chamber and speak words that could not be taken back. Tomorrow humanity would either be heard or would prove, once and for all, that the council was a hollow institution that served only the powerful. The Endeavor dropped out of hyperspace the next morning and Proxima Axis appeared before them. The station was enormous and beautiful and represented everything the Galactic Council claimed to stand for. Peace through cooperation, justice through law, protection for all member species regardless of their strength. Richard looked at it and wondered if those ideals had ever been real, or if they had always been comfortable lies that let the powerful sleep well at night. Proxima Axis was more impressive, up close than any hologram could capture. The station was the size of a small moon and had been built over centuries by combining the architectural styles of dozens of civilizations. Towers rose from the central hub in spirals that defied human understanding of physics. Gardens floated in transparent domes where plants from 100 worlds grew side by side. Ships from every corner of the galaxy docked at ports that stretched for kilometers in all directions. The council chamber itself sat at the heart of the station. Richard Cole walked through corridors lined with monuments to galactic history. He saw statues of famous mediators who had prevented wars and plaques commemorating treaties that had brought peace to entire sectors. The message was clear. This was a place where reason triumphed over violence and where law protected the weak from the strong. Richard wondered how many people actually believed that anymore. Lisa Hayes walked beside him with her hand resting casually near her sidearm. She was technically unarmed according to council regulations, but Richard knew she had ways of protecting herself that did not show up on security scanners. Nathan Pierce followed behind them, reviewing his notes one final time. They had rehearsed this moment for 2 weeks, but now that it was here, the weight of what they were about to do felt almost overwhelming. The chamber doors opened and Richard stepped into a space that made him feel insignificant. The amphitheater was vast enough to hold thousands of beings. The domed ceiling displayed real-time images of homeworlds belonging to all 47 member species. Earth appeared as a small blue marble in the outer ring of displays. It looked fragile and lonely compared to the ancient worlds that dominated the center positions. Delegate platforms filled the chamber in concentric circles. The Gentari occupied the position of honor at the very center. High Chancellor Vorn stood on a raised dais that put him above everyone else in the room. He was 7 feet tall with crimson scales that caught the light and scars that marked him as a veteran of countless battles. His people had been spacefaring for 3,000 years, and their military strength made them natural leaders of the council. To the left hovered the Kelvin delegates on anti-gravity platforms. They were insectoid beings whose bodies seemed to be made of living crystal. Light refracted through them in patterns that hurt human eyes to look at directly. The Kelvin had mastered quantum physics before humanity had invented the wheel. Their technology was so advanced that it seemed like magic to younger species. The Mordesh stood to the right, as silent as mountains. They were massive creatures that resembled intelligent stone. Each one weighed several tons and moved with deliberate slowness that made them seem almost statuesque. The Mordesh were the oldest species in the council. Their civilization had risen and fallen and risen again, while other species were still learning to make fire. Richard found the human platform near the outer ring of the chamber. It was a modest disk barely large enough for 3 people to stand comfortably. The position said everything about humanity's place in galactic politics. They were members, but only barely. They had a voice, but it was not expected to say anything important. Delegates from other species filled the remaining platforms. Richard recognized some of them from previous council sessions. The Toller were aquatic beings who attended via hologram, since they could not survive in standard atmosphere. The Prax were small furry creatures whose appearance was deceiving, because their minds worked faster than any computer. The Yorn were energy beings who existed partially in dimensions that humans could not perceive. High Chancellor. Vorn called the session to order with a voice that boomed through the chamber without need for amplification. The translation matrix hummed as it converted his words into 47 different languages simultaneously. He spoke with the authority of someone who had led the council for 20 years and expected to be obeyed without question. The agenda was simple. They were gathered to address the incident in the Terminus sector. The loss of the human colony ship New Dawn was regrettable. The council had reviewed the reports and had authorized a full investigation. The investigation would be conducted according to proper procedures and would be completed within the standard time frame of 1 solar cycle. 1 year. They were offering humanity 1 year of bureaucratic process while the Vrex continued raiding and killing with impunity. Richard felt anger rise in his chest, but he kept his expression neutral. This was exactly what he had expected. The council was going through the motions of caring while actually doing nothing. Vorn continued speaking about the importance of following established procedures. He talked about maintaining stability and avoiding rash actions that could destabilize the delicate balance of galactic politics. He used words like prudence and wisdom and patience. Every word was carefully chosen to sound reasonable while meaning absolutely nothing. The matter was now open for discussion. Representatives could speak in order of seniority. The Kelvin delegate went first with a 20-minute speech about the importance of proper procedure. The Kelvin had been navigating complex legal systems for millennia, and they believed that following rules was more important than achieving results. Their delegate spoke in crystalline tones about patience and thoroughness and the need to gather all facts before taking action. The Mordesh delegate spoke next with philosophical reflections on the nature of loss. To beings who lived for thousands of years, the death of 15,000 humans was a tragedy, but not an unusual one. Civilizations rose and fell. People died. The universe continued. The Mordesh believed that emotional reactions led to poor decisions, and that true wisdom came from detachment and long-term thinking. One by one, the elder species spoke. Each statement was polished and diplomatic. Each one expressed sympathy for humanity's loss, and each one carefully avoided any commitment to actual action. Richard listened and counted the minutes. 3 hours passed while delegates offered empty words dressed up as profound wisdom. Finally, Vorn gestured toward the outer ring. The human representative could now speak if they wished to add comment. The phrasing was deliberate. Richard was not being invited to participate in the discussion. He was being allowed to add a footnote to decisions that had already been made by beings who considered themselves his superiors. This was the moment. Everything they had planned led to this. Richard stepped forward to the edge of the human platform. Lisa and Nathan moved with him, presenting a unified front. The chamber fell silent as delegates turned their attention to the humans. Most expected a brief statement thanking the council for their attention. Some probably expected tears or emotional pleas. Richard's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. No. The single word echoed in the vast space. Delegates shifted on their platforms. The Kelvin's crystalline wings vibrated with confusion. The Mordesh turned their massive heads slowly to stare at the human delegation. In 400 years of recorded council sessions, no representative had ever begun their statement with a refusal. Vorn's crest flared in surprise. His expression showed genuine confusion because this was not how things were done. Junior species did not refuse the council. They did not challenge the order of things. They certainly did not stand before 47 civilizations and say no, as if they had the right to reject decisions made by their betters. Ambassador Cole, you may address the council with your concerns. Vorn's tone suggested he was giving Richard a chance to correct his mistake. This was an opportunity to apologize and return to proper diplomatic behavior. Richard looked up at the High Chancellor, and his eyes held no apology. No, I will not address my concerns. I will not offer a statement. I will not participate in this theater. The chamber erupted in murmurs. Delegates spoke to each other in dozens of languages. The translation matrix struggled to keep up. Some voices showed anger. Others showed shock. A few showed what might have been respect or at least curiosity about what the human was doing. Instead, Richard continued, I will speak truth. And you will listen. Ambassador, you forget yourself. Vorn's voice carried a warning. There are protocols that must be followed. You cannot simply demand the council's attention without showing proper respect. Richard smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Protocols. You want to speak of protocols? Then let us begin with Protocol 17 of the Galactic Charter, which states that any unprovoked attack on civilian vessels constitutes an act of war requiring immediate council intervention. He activated his wrist display, and holographic documents appeared in the air above the human platform. The documents were visible to every delegate in the chamber. Each one bore official council seals and authentication codes that proved their legitimacy. Richard had spent 2 weeks with Nathan verifying every single word in these files. The Vrex have attacked human ships 43 times in the past decade. 43 times. Each attack was reported to this council. Each report was filed and reviewed and shelved. The investigation you offer today is the same investigation you offered after the 19th attack and the 27th and the 38th. The documents scrolled past, showing date after date of attacks and reports and empty promises. The pattern was undeniable. The council had been aware of the problem for years and had done nothing meaningful to stop it. Silence fell across the council chamber like a physical weight pressing down on every being present. Delegates who had been speaking to each other in low voices stopped mid-sentence. The translation matrix hummed in the sudden quiet, waiting for more words to process. In 400 years of recorded council sessions, no representative had ever begun their statement with the word no. It was not done. It violated every principle of diplomatic courtesy that held the galactic community together. High Chancellor Vorn's crest flared wider, showing his confusion and growing irritation. His crimson scales caught the light from the dome above as he stared down at the human platform. Ambassador Cole, you may address the council with your concerns. The words were spoken carefully, as if Vorn was giving Richard a chance to correct what must surely be a mistake or a translation error. But Richard Cole did not look confused or apologetic. He stood straight with his shoulders back and his expression calm. No. The word came out clear and firm. I will not address my concerns. I will not offer a statement for your consideration. I will not participate in this theater you call justice. The chamber erupted. Delegates from 36 species began talking at once. Some voices were angry, demanding that the human be removed for his disrespect. Others sounded shocked, as if they could not believe what they were hearing. The Kelvin's crystalline wings vibrated so fast they created a high-pitched sound that cut through the noise. The Mordesh remained silent, but their massive stone bodies shifted forward slightly, as if trying to better understand what was happening. Vorn raised both hands, calling for order. The noise died down gradually, though many delegates continued to stare at Richard with expressions ranging from fury to curiosity. Ambassador, you forget yourself. There are protocols that govern council proceedings. You cannot simply refuse to follow them because you are upset about a tragic incident. Richard smiled, but there was nothing friendly in the expression. It was the kind of smile that made Lisa Hayes touch her concealed weapon reflexively. It was the smile of someone who had been pushed too far and had finally decided to push back. Instead of addressing your empty promises, I will speak truth. And you will listen whether you want to or not. The threat was unmistakable. Several delegates started to protest again, but Vorn silenced them with a gesture. His expression had changed from irritation to something closer to wariness. The human was not behaving like a junior species representative should behave. There was something dangerous in his tone that Vorn recognized from his centuries of military service. Protocols? Richard's voice rose slightly. You want to speak of protocols? Then let us begin with Protocol 17 of the Galactic Charter, the protocol that states any unprovoked attack on civilian vessels constitutes an act of war requiring immediate council intervention. He activated his wrist display, and suddenly the air above the human platform filled with holographic documents. They expanded outward, becoming large enough for every delegate in the chamber to read clearly. Each document bore the official seals of the Council Secretariat. Each one had been properly filed and authenticated. There could be no question about their legitimacy. The Vrex have attacked human ships 43 times in the past decade. Richard gestured, and the documents began scrolling past in chronological order. 43 separate incidents. Each one was reported to this council through proper channels. Each report was filed and reviewed by your committees. Each time you promised investigation and justice. The documents continued scrolling, showing attack after attack. Dates and locations and casualty numbers filled the air. Mining ships destroyed in the asteroid fields. Transport vessels boarded and their crews killed. Colony supply runs that never reached their destinations. And at the bottom of each report was the Council's response. Always the same carefully worded, promise to investigate thoroughly and bring perpetrators to justice through appropriate legal channels. The investigation you offered us today is identical to the investigation you offered after the 19th attack. Richard pointed to specific documents highlighting the identical language used in responses years apart. And the 27th attack. And the 38th attack. You have given us the same empty promise 19 times. Nathan Pierce stepped forward to stand beside Richard. His voice was calm and academic, as if he were presenting research findings to colleagues. We conducted a comprehensive analysis of Council response patterns over the past 2 centuries. We examined every incident involving member species and measured the time between incident reports and actual Council intervention. He activated his own display showing graphs and statistical models. The data formed patterns that were impossible to deny. Response time correlates directly with the military and economic power of the affected species. When Gentari ships are attacked, the Council authorizes military action within days. When Kelvin installations are threatened, emergency sessions are called within hours. But when human ships are destroyed, Nathan let the question hang in the air. Average response time is 14 months, and in most cases the response consists entirely of forming an investigative committee that produces no actionable results. Richard's voice cut back in before anyone could protest. Do you know what I realized while reviewing these documents? You do not ignore us because you are unaware of the problem. You ignore us because you have calculated that human lives are not worth the inconvenience of intervention. That is a serious accusation. Forn's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. You are suggesting the Council deliberately values some species above others. I am not suggesting anything. Richard's tone was flat and certain. I am stating a mathematical fact backed by 200 years of your own records. Humanity ranks 43rd out of 47 species in Council priority response. The only species who receive slower responses are those with even less military capability than us. Lisa Hayes moved to stand on Richard's other side, presenting a unified front. While you deliberate, our people die. While you form committees, our children are slaughtered. While you debate proper procedures, the Vrex grow bolder, because they know you will do nothing meaningful to stop them. The Kelvin representative's crystalline voice rang out across the chamber. What would you have us do? Launch military campaigns every time there is a border skirmish? We maintain galactic peace through careful consideration and measured responses. Acting rashly would destabilize everything we have built. Richard turned to face the Kelvin delegate directly. That is the interesting thing about peace. It only works when all parties believe in it. The Vrex do not believe in your peace. They see your careful consideration as weakness. They see your protocols as shields behind which they can operate with complete impunity. And what do you see, Ambassador? Vorn asked. His tone suggested he was genuinely curious about the answer. I see a council that has forgotten why it was created. Richard's voice filled the chamber. You were formed to protect the weak from the strong, to ensure that civilization triumphed over barbarism, to guarantee that every species, regardless of their military power, had the right to exist in safety. He gestured at the documents, still hanging in the air. Instead, you have become comfortable. You have become bureaucrats managing a system that serves only those powerful enough to demand service. You write beautiful words about justice and equality, but you only enforce them when it is convenient. The chamber was silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. Delegates were not simply shocked anymore. They were beginning to understand that the human was not making an emotional plea. He was presenting a case built on their own laws and their own failures. So here is what humanity proposes. Richard's voice dropped lower, but somehow carried even more authority. We invoke Article 9 of the Galactic Charter, the right of autonomous defense. Several delegates gasped. Article 9 was an ancient provision that almost no one referenced anymore. It dated back to the Council's founding when the galaxy was more dangerous and less organized. It gave member species the right to defend themselves, without Council approval, if the Council failed to provide adequate protection. Since the Council cannot or will not act to protect human citizens, we will protect ourselves. Richard let each word land with full weight. We will no longer wait for your permission. We will no longer beg for protection you have proven unwilling to provide. Vorn stood fully upright now, his full 7 feet of height, making him imposing even at a distance. You cannot simply declare independence from council authority. You are bound by treaties your government signed 200 years ago. Richard nodded as if he had expected this exact response. Treaties that obligate us to follow council directives in exchange for council protection. But what happens when the council fails to uphold its end of the bargain? What happens when the protection you promised turns out to be nothing but words on paper? Nathan pulled up another set of documents. These ones glowed with different colored seals indicating they had been filed with multiple council offices. 3 days ago, Earth filed formal notice of treaty violations with the council secretariat. We documented every instance where the council failed to provide the protection guaranteed under Articles 17, 23, and 31 under Section 5 of the Charter continued and repeated treaty violations. Void the obligations of the affected party. Lisa's voice was hard and precise. Our legal team has spent 2 centuries studying galactic law. We know exactly what rights we have under your own rules. Richard looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of delegates from powerful species and weak ones alike. Some of you understand what we are doing. You remember when your own species were in our position. You remember being ignored and dismissed. You remember watching your people die while the council debated. We are not asking for special treatment. His voice softened slightly but lost none of its conviction. We are asking for the equal treatment your charter promises. We are demanding that you either honor your obligations to all member species or admit that those obligations are meaningless. The silence that followed was absolute. Every delegate in the chamber understood that humanity had just fundamentally changed the nature of their relationship with the council. The question now was how the council would respond. The protests grew louder throughout the council chamber, but Richard Cole's voice cut through them all like a ship breaking through atmosphere. He had spent 30 years learning to project calm authority, and now he used every bit of that skill to make himself heard over the chaos. The translation matrix amplified his words into 47 languages simultaneously and ensured that no delegate could claim they had not understood what he was saying. Effective immediately, humanity withdraws from council jurisdiction in all matters relating to our security. We will no longer wait for permission to defend our people. We will no longer beg for protection you have no intention of providing. High Chancellor Vorn rose to his full imposing height. His crimson scales seemed to darken with anger, and his battle scars stood out in sharp relief against his skin. You cannot simply declare independence from council law. You are bound by treaties that were signed 200 years ago when Earth joined this body. Treaties you have repeatedly violated. Colonel Lisa Hayes interrupted without hesitation. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had spent years commanding troops in combat. Article 17 guarantees mutual defense. Article 23 promises timely intervention in humanitarian crises. Article 31 ensures equal treatment under council law. You have broken every single one of them. Richard pulled up another document that glowed with multiple authentication seals. 3 days ago, we filed formal notice of treaty violations with the council secretariat. Under Section 5 of the Charter, repeated violations void treaty obligations. Our lawyers have spent 2 centuries studying your laws. We know exactly what we are allowed to do. The Mordesh representative shifted his massive stone body forward. The movie. Emet was slow and deliberate as everything the ancient beings did. This is madness. You are one species among 47. You cannot stand alone against the dangers of the galaxy. We are not asking to stand alone. Richard's voice softened slightly but lost none of its steel. We are asking to stand at all. For 200 years we have been silent partners in this council. We have paid our dues and followed your rules and watched, as you treated us like children, who should be grateful for scraps from the adult table. He turned slowly, making eye contact with delegates throughout the chamber. Some looked away uncomfortable with his direct gaze. Others met his eyes with expressions ranging from anger to curiosity. Some of you remember when your own species were young, when you stood where we stand now. You remember what it was like to be dismissed and ignored, to watch your people suffer while the powerful debated philosophical implications of helping you. Nathan Pierce stepped forward with his datapad displaying graphs and statistics. Humanity is not leaving the council. We are reminding you what it is supposed to be. The Charter does not give you the right to pick and choose who deserves protection. It demands you protect all members equally or you protect none. Several delegates began speaking at once. The Kelvin representative's crystalline voice rose above the others. This is unprecedented. You cannot rewrite 2 centuries of diplomatic relations because you are unhappy with one decision. One decision. Lisa's laugh was sharp and bitter. 43 attacks over 10 years. 15,000 civilians dead 3 weeks ago. Hundreds more in previous raids. At what number does it stop being one decision and start being systematic negligence? Vorn raised his hand for silence and the chamber gradually quieted. And if we refuse your demands, what will humanity do then? Richard's expression hardened into something that made several delegates lean back slightly. Then you will learn why humans are dangerous when we stop being polite. Lisa activated her own display showing real-time feeds from across human space. The images appeared as holograms visible to everyone in the chamber. While we have been talking, every human military vessel has gone to high alert. Every colony has activated its defense grid. Every ship in our merchant fleet has been armed and placed under military command. The feeds showed hundreds of warships and thousands of installations all bearing the blue and white insignia of the United Earth Defense. Force fighters launched from carriers. Defense platforms powered up their weapons. Ground forces moved into defensive positions. It was not the largest military in the galaxy, but it was far more extensive and better coordinated than the Council had realized. You have been building this in secret. The Kelvin representative's voice vibrated with accusation. This violates the military transparency accords. We have been preparing for the day you forced us to choose between your protection and our survival, Richard corrected calmly. That day has come, and we have violated nothing. Every ship and weapon you see was registered with the Council Secretariat. You simply never bothered to look at the reports because you assumed humanity would never be significant enough to matter. He pulled up one final document, and this one made several delegates recoil in shock. It was a comprehensive battle plan showing strike routes into Vrex territory. Red lines traced paths through hyperspace lanes. Target coordinates marked military installations and supply depots. Estimated casualties were listed in cold mathematical precision. This was not a bluff or a threat. This was a fully developed military operation ready to launch. In 72 hours, a human fleet will enter the Terminus sector. We will eliminate every Vrex military installation within 50 light years of our borders. We will rescue any prisoners they hold. We will establish a security zone that will be patrolled by human forces indefinitely. This is an act of war, Vorn said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. He was beginning to understand that humanity was not asking for permission anymore. No, Richard said quietly. This is an act of self-defense. One you should have authorized months ago. We are simply doing what you refused to do, what we have every legal right to do under your own charter. The chamber fell into a silence heavier than any that had come before. Every delegate understood that something fundamental had just shifted in galactic politics. The quiet humans from the Outer Rim had just delivered an ultimatum to civilizations that had been ruling the stars for thousands of years. Nathan spoke into the silence with the calm precision of an academic presenting research. We have identified 17 separate precedents for autonomous military action under Council law. The Gentari used it 400 years ago during the Kelvin border dispute. The Prax invoked it 200 years ago when their mining colonies were attacked. The Council authorized both actions retroactively after the fact. You can authorize this action and maintain the illusion that the Council still matters, Richard continued. Or you can oppose it and prove to everyone watching that the Council is a hollow institution that exists only to protect the powerful. He paused and let the weight of those words settle over the chamber. Either way, the fleet launches in 72 hours. The only question is whether you want to be part of the solution or part of the problem. Lisa added one more detail that made several military-minded delegates sit up straighter. We are not attacking blindly. We know where every Vrex military base is located. We know their fleet dispositions. We know which installations hold prisoners. We have been gathering intelligence for 3 years because we knew this day would eventually come. Richard Cole turned and walked back to the human platform. Lisa and Nathan followed him. They stood together in silence while 47 species stared at them. Some delegates looked angry. Others looked thoughtful. A few looked almost approving, though they would never say so publicly. High Chancellor Vorn looked across the chamber at the faces of other senior delegates. He saw shock and anger, but he also saw something else. Respect. The humans had not begged or pleaded. They had not made emotional appeals or relied on sympathy. They had presented facts and legal arguments and backed them up with military capability. They had done everything a powerful species was supposed to do. The Council will take a brief recess to consider the human proposal. Vorn's voice was carefully neutral. We will reconvene in 2 hours. As delegates began filing out of the chamber, Richard allowed himself a small smile. They had come to Proxima Axis expecting to be lectured about patience and proper procedure. Instead, they had reminded the galaxy of something it had forgotten. Humanity did not ask for permission anymore. Lisa leaned closer and spoke quietly. Do you think they will authorize it? Richard watched as senior delegates clustered in small groups speaking urgently to each other. Some chance, yes, but it does not matter. The fleet launches regardless. Nathan checked his datapad showing messages flooding in from Earth and the colonies. Public reaction to the speech was overwhelmingly positive. Humans across 30 star systems were celebrating. They were tired of being ignored. They were ready to see their government stand up for their rights. The 2-hour recess felt like 2 days. Richard, Lisa, and Nathan remained on the human platform, while other delegates avoided looking at them directly. They were radioactive now, too dangerous to approach until the Council decided how to respond. Finally, Vorn called the chamber back to order. His expression was unreadable as he looked down at the human delegation. The Council has debated your proposal. We have reviewed the legal arguments and precedents. We have considered the implications for galactic stability. Richard stood straight and prepared for whatever came next. They had played their hand. Now they would see if it was enough. After extensive deliberation, the Council has decided to grant humanity autonomous military authority in the Terminus sector under Article 9 of the Charter. Human forces may engage Vrex military targets with Council authorization effective immediately. The chamber erupted again, but this time the noise was different. Some delegates protested, but others seemed relieved. The Council had found a way to save face while giving humanity what it demanded. They could claim they had authorized the action all along. Richard nodded slowly. It was not everything he wanted, but it was enough. Humanity had spoken, and for the first time in 200 years, the galaxy had actually listened. Things would be different now. The quiet species from the outer rim had just changed the rules, and everyone knew it.